The world without electricity. If Nikola Tesla had never been born, we would all still be sitting around by candlelight. You have heard some version of that sentence. It sounds reasonable. It has the shape of a fact, and it is wrong in almost every part. Tesla did not invent electricity. Nobody did. Electricity is not a device. It is a phenomenon. It was in lightning long before there were eyes to see lightning, and it is running through your head right now, which is the only reason you can understand this sentence at all. And here is the more uncomfortable part. If Tesla had never been born, we would almost certainly still have electricity. Because at the same time, in a country he had never visited, an Italian physicist worked out the same underlying principle on his own, without ever having heard of him. This keeps happening. Calculus was invented twice, at roughly the same time, by two men who then spent years arguing about who got there first. Evolution by natural selection was worked out twice, at the same time, by two men who ended up presenting it together because neither of them could reasonably claim it alone. Inventions are not lightning strikes that hit one lucky genius. They are what happens when the ground gets wet enough, when the materials exist and the mathematics exists, and enough people are staring at the same problem from enough directions, the answer arrives. It does not particularly care whose hands it arrives in. So the interesting question was never what would have happened if Tesla had never been born. The interesting question is this: what if we had never worked out how to control electricity at all? The first thing everyone pictures is darkness, a poor world, a slow, cold, candle-lit world, waiting for something that never came. That is not what happens. Steam works. Steam works extremely well, and it had been working extremely well for a long time before electricity arrived and took the job. Walk into a factory in that world and look up. Running the entire length of the ceiling is a steel shaft, turning, and it never stops. One enormous steam engine at the far end of the building spins it. Hanging down from that shaft are dozens of leather belts, each one dropping into a different machine on the floor below. Pull a lever and your machine engages with the shaft. Push it and your machine falls still while everything around it keeps moving. The whole factory is a single animal breathing through one lung. It is deafening. It is hot. Loose sleeves and long hair are genuinely dangerous in a way that is difficult to imagine now. But it works, and it built most of the modern world before anything was ever plugged into a wall. Now, here is the part that surprises people. We had already solved the problem of sending power across an entire city without electricity, not as a theory. As a working system, underneath London, there were high-pressure water mains running below the streets. Not drinking water. Water held under enormous pressure and piped through the city for the specific purpose of driving machinery. It raised lifts in hotels. It opened and closed a bridge across the Thames. It lifted and dropped the curtains in theaters across the West End every night, on demand, for decades. And this was not some brief Victorian curiosity that died young. That system was still in service well into the era of color television. So take stock of this world. We have power. We have factories. We have cities that function. We have lifts and bridges and light from gas and trains that cross continents and ships that cross oceans. It is starting to look like we would have been perfectly fine. That feeling lasts right up until you ask one specific question. Steam can send force. Water under pressure can send force. Neither of them can send a sentence. That is the whole thing. That is the hinge the entire world turns on. And almost nobody thinks about it because we have never had to. No electricity means no telegraph, no telephone, no radio, no electromagnetic anything in any form, which means information cannot travel faster than an object can be physically carried, or faster than a human being can see. And we did try. Long before electricity, we tried very hard. France built towers, tall ones standing in a line, marching across the country from city to city, each one placed just close enough to see the next one through a telescope. On the roof of every tower sat a set of huge jointed wooden arms, and those arms could be swung into different positions. Each position meant something: a letter, a word, a code. A man sat inside each tower with a telescope pointed back at the tower behind him. When the arms on that tower moved, he copied the shape. Then the man in the next tower copied him. And so a message crossed the country as a ripple, not carried by anything, and not traveling in any physical sense, simply repeated over and over by a line of people who mostly had no idea what they were saying. A message could cross more than 200 kilometers in about half an hour. In a century where the fastest thing on earth was a horse, that is not communication. That is something close to magic. But now go and sit in one of those towers. It is 4 a.m. in January. You have been awake since midnight, because the message coming through tonight is urgent, and urgent messages do not wait for daylight. Except that they do, because that is the one thing this system cannot do. You cannot see the arms in the dark. You cannot see them in fog. You cannot see them in heavy rain, or when the cloud comes down low, which in winter is most days. So you sit and you wait for the weather. Somewhere behind you there's a message that matters, a decision, a warning, a name on a list of the dead. It is sitting in a wooden arm on a rooftop 10 kilometers away, and it will keep sitting there until the sky clears, because there is no other way for it to reach you. Not a faster way, not an expensive way, in no way at all. That is what a world without electricity actually looks like. Not a dark world, a waiting world. The most important information in the country moves only on clear days. And when the fog comes down, an entire nation simply does not know. So, if there is no telephone, what is there instead? The answer is tubes. Paris had them. So did London and New York and Berlin. Networks of metal pipes running under the streets of the whole city. And inside those pipes, compressed air. You put a message into a small cylinder. You sealed it. You pushed it into the pipe, and the air did the rest. It shot across the city and arrived at the other end minutes later. This was not a novelty. It was infrastructure. Post offices, newspapers, stock exchanges, and hospitals were wired into it the way buildings are wired for internet now. And it was not as long ago as you would think. At least one European city was still running its pneumatic network into this century, decades after the internet existed. Now imagine that this technology had never been killed off by electricity, and instead had another 100 years of development poured into it. The thing in your house is a brass cylinder, sitting in a socket in the wall. You write your message on a slip of paper. You roll it, you push it into the cylinder, you close the lid. There is a soft knock as it is pulled away into the wall. And then, silence. And then you wait. If the person is in your city, maybe 20 minutes. If they are in the next city, hours. If they are on another continent, the answer is a ship. And the answer is 2 weeks. Nothing in that world is instant. Nothing at all. Which means there is no such thing as calling someone. The idea of a live conversation with a person further away than your voice can carry simply does not exist, and there is no word for it because there is nothing to name. It also means nobody has ever been left on red. You can be ignored, but you can never know that you are being ignored. The silence and the delay look identical. You just wait, and you decide for yourself what the waiting means. At this point, a question arrives on its own. What about computers? The answer is that you can have them. In fact, we did have them. Warships in the world wars carried computers made entirely of metal. No circuits, no current, nothing electronic in them at all. Gears, shafts, cams, and rods packed into a steel cabinet weighing several tons. And inside that cabinet, the machine was continuously solving a genuinely difficult problem. It tracked the speed of its own ship. It tracked the speed of the target. It accounted for wind, for gravity, for the time the shell would spend in the air, and for the fact that the Earth itself rotates underneath a shell in flight. It did all of this at once, and it updated the answer constantly as the ship rolled in the swell. It sounded like a clock the size of a bedroom, and it was accurate enough to hit something you could barely see. So the ceiling is not intelligence. The machine was clever. The ceiling is something much simpler and much more brutal than that. A transistor switches by moving nothing. There is no lever, no arm, no piece of metal that has to travel from one place to another. Electrons move, and that is all. And so it can switch 1 billion times a second without anything ever wearing out. A gear has to physically turn. Metal has weight. Weight has inertia. Inertia takes time, and no amount of clever engineering makes brass weigh less than brass. Between those two things, there is a gap of roughly 10 million times. That is not a design problem waiting for a smarter generation. It is a wall made of physics, and it does not move. So that world has computers. It has rooms full of them, and they spend all night working out something your phone finishes before you have lifted your finger off the screen. Plenty of things survive in this world, and more than you would expect. Refrigeration survives because there is a way to make cold using nothing but heat, with no moving electrical parts at all, and it genuinely works. Light survives. From gas, cars survive, although you start them by hand. Printing survives. Surgery survives. Railways and steamships survive. So the world is still connected, just slowly. But a whole category of things quietly disappears and never comes back. There is no X-ray, which means there is no way to look inside a living human being without opening them up. Every broken bone is guessed at by hand. Every tumor is found late or found by the surgeon. There is no radio, no recorded sound of any kind, which means that if you want to hear music, someone in the room has to make it. Every song that has ever moved you is a performance happening in front of you, or it does not exist at all. Nobody has ever heard the voice of a dead person. And then there are two things almost nobody thinks of. The first is aluminium. Separating aluminium from its ore takes an enormous amount of electricity, and without that, aluminium stays what it was in the 19th century, which is a precious metal, rarer and more expensive than silver. So there is no aluminium in your kitchen, no aluminium in your buildings, and no passenger aircraft in any form you would recognize. The sky stays empty. The second is fertilizer. Producing nitrogen fertilizer at industrial scale takes vast amounts of energy, and that fertilizer is the reason the soil of this planet currently feeds as many people as it does. Without it, the ground supports far fewer of us, not because of war, not because of plague, simply because the number of people the land can carry is lower, and always was. Which means that in this world, there are fewer people. Many fewer. And there is a reasonable chance that one of the people who never gets born is you. Now go back and look at that list again, and notice what is actually missing. Not energy. We had steam, not light. We had gas. Not calculation, we had gears. Not even messages. We had towers and tubes, and they worked. The only thing missing is the word instantly. That is what electricity gave us. Not power, not brightness, not intelligence. For the first time in the history of our species, we could send something to a distant place without waiting for it to get there. Everything else, all of it, is downstream of that one thing. And it is worth sitting with how recent that is. We spent 50,000 years in a world where everything took time. News moved at walking speed. Food arrived when the season allowed it and not before. Someone you loved walked over a hill and you had no way of knowing whether they were alive until they either came back or did not. Waiting was not patience. Waiting was simply what being alive felt like. Then, in less than 150 years, we built a world with no waiting in it at all. And we handed it to a brain that has not been updated since. So, the irritation you feel when a page takes 3 seconds to load is not impatience, and it is not a character flaw. It is an animal built to wait months, meeting a world that has just finished teaching it that nothing needs to be waited for. And it only learned that yesterday